We're going to be discussing blockchain and social impact and how we can leverage this technology for positive social change. It is a hugely important conversation, and moderating this discussion will be Nikita Sachdev. Now, she is the CEO and the founder of Luna PR, and alongside her guest, Nikita is going to be, I suppose, exploring the transformative power of blockchain in creating a more equitable and a more transparent world. Really interesting conversation about to come your way. So please welcome Nikita and her guest to the stage.
Amazing. Good afternoon, right? Afternoon now. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Cardano Summit is absolutely crushing it. It's always great to be back and see its presence here in Dubai. Before I begin the panel, I would love to start off with some introductions. Maybe I'll go first, and then you guys can lead the way. My name is Nikita Sachdev. I'm the CEO and founder of Luna Media Corp. Nothing to do with Luna Terra. Luna PR is our PR agency. It's our bread and butter. We have a private investment firm. We have a recruitment agency, branding agency. We have 7 companies within our portfolio. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. We're headquartered in Dubai, offices in London, US, and Singapore. And I'll let you guys take it away.
Hi, my name is Andrea Pražáková. I'm CEO and founder of Andrea Now. I'll be focusing on education of corporate institutions in area of blockchain, crypto, space technologies, quantum and AI. And on the side as well, we're building solutions which are powered by blockchain to support circular economy.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Billy Richards, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of ChangeBlock. We help innovators and companies all over the world create carbon credits and help them transact them to help finance their sustainable activities.
My name is Danny Spiller. I'm working for the United Nations Development Program. I'm leading our capacity building efforts there mainly, so that means I'm training our own staff, also the UN agencies, in their digital transformation, but also helping our government partners across 170 countries to learn about emerging technologies, including blockchain.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Maza. I'm the sustainability lead at the Cardano Foundation, the non-for-profit that is seeking to drive adoption of the Cardano protocol. And in my job, I look at sustainability and blockchain in 2 ways. One, blockchain for sustainability, so blockchain for good, and we're going to be speaking about a few projects that we work on as CF. And then we also look at the sustainability of the blockchain. From an environmental, social, a governance perspective, how can a blockchain have staying power? How can it stay operationally resilient? Super excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to hear from you guys. Right. So when I started my company, Luna PR, I actually, I mean, the whole idea came to light because I was absolutely sick of how crypto was portrayed in mainstream media. I constantly just saw articles on hacks and scams, and actually the underlying technology of it, blockchain technology, had, I mean, incredible potential. So I really align with this topic today, and I'd love for you guys to dive in deeper on how blockchain technology is actually affecting these sectors for a social good.
Okay, ladies first. I was on a panel yesterday. I was the last one, so I was exactly on the opposite. So, you know, maybe on Friday at Ragdao, I will be in the middle. So I think it's a great question, Nikita. So if you look at the blockchain from a technology perspective and not taking out the crypto, it can really bring a lot of positive applications, right? First of all, this provenance and transparency. Let's maybe bring it a little bit closer to home. And we talk about social impact. So many of us give a lot to charities, right? And consumers have a lot of boundaries and scarce to give to charities because they don't know where the money actually ends up. And I think blockchain is a fantastic instrument and tokens to make sure that wherever your money is going, you can actually see how the money is used, you could see how the money is disbursed, and what the ultimate impact is. So I think that from a human perspective, it's really, really powerful. On the other side, from sustainability, I mean, we all wearing some clothes today. You know, consumers really want to know, where does the clothes comes from? Not only from a material perspective, that it's maybe not done from traditional silkworms, but synthetic worms. But they also want to know that there was no child labor employed when they've been producing it. So I think blockchain, again, together with tokens, is a fantastic technology for a provenance in terms of whatever we have, so that we can measure it. And then on the positive upside is to say, once obviously you buy something which has a positive sustainable impact, you can receive tokens as a reward, which can potentially obviously use as a loyalty system. So I think that the application of blockchain is in multiple different facets, from social impact to different sectors like fashion or production to loyalty systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy, do you want to kind of add on to that and perhaps give like maybe some real world applications?
No, definitely. I think I agree with what you've described. I think, you know, I view blockchain as kind of like a bulletin board that means that you can, you know, exchange information and keep records in a way that's really unchangeable. I think it's important to separate cryptocurrencies necessarily, because they're quite different, and I think we've already fallen guilty of blending the two. But I think, you know, example applications of blockchain features that can help drive sustainability are exactly that, as you've mentioned, by data provenance. So say you have an environmental project that's doing some sustainable activity. There's one that's linked with the United Nations, City and Me, for example. You know, this records different individual activities in these cities that people undertake, you know, reducing their use of diesel cars, they might cycle more. That kind of information is collected. That can go on-chain at source, you know, at the kind of moment that person rides that bike. And when you do that and you encrypt that information, you put it on the bulletin board, the effect of that means that it can never be changed. And so when you go to talk to buyers of these potential credits, or the financiers, HSBC, NatWest, these blended finance teams at UBS, that's what they look for to kind of make that investment in these sustainable practices for it to iterate through. So I think that is a particular example, is that data provenance at source from sustainability projects that give the investors, the buyers, the people, you know, driving up this activity, the confidence that it's doing what it should be.
Can I add something to it? Because I really like what you said. You know, I feel that from a technology perspective, you need to feed it with data, right? And I think that's where also the Oracle technology comes in. And you are in carbon credits, so I am just turning my house here into solar, right? And it lives in a big compound. So as an individual contributor, I obviously cannot produce enough carbon credit or solar credits and to offset them to HSBC, right? But the compound itself can aggregate these solar credits. So it will use from a data input satellite technology to measure how big is my roof, how much I produce. It would use IoT devices to feed additional data. And obviously from a bridging, it would use the Oracle system to feed the real life data into the blockchain, which then is validated. So I think that's a great example for carbon credits, solar credits, water credits, how we as individuals can make money out of it in a communal system once it's obviously running on chain, utilizing these different data sources.
And I think ultimately it leads us towards democratization of energy, which is a big move and trend I think we're going to see this kind of century, you know, as we take energy, control over energy into our hands, away from these big centralized energy organizations.
I mean, it's definitely clear how blockchain technology can have a positive impact on the, I guess, the sustainability, sustainable development goals. Why isn't it, I mean, is it moving as fast? I mean, do we see it as much in the mainstream? What are your thoughts on that, Danny?
So it isn't, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was just listening to you two, and I was thinking that there's one particular ingredient is missing, and that's convincing. And I think you started saying this, right? We didn't do a good job saying how positive an impact the technology can have, and you were just talking about the democratization of energy. I don't think any of these projects can actually be very successful without the proper regulatory framework from a government and the government buy-in and the knowledge of governments to understand what this technology can actually do. If you want to do social impact at scale, you have to somehow involve the governmental partners from our perspective, right? And without working with them, and without them actually, first of all, understanding what blockchain is, how it can be used, the different use cases, how we can apply it, what you just said, from water to energy to carbon credits. Without overcoming that barrier, I don't think you can be very successful, or you can scale these projects very successfully. So.
Definitely, and I think the UAE is actually doing quite a good job at kind of fast forwarding that process. I think not only are they trying to have a clear regulatory framework, but they're also kind of walking the walk and ensuring that it's implemented into everyday life here, from your identities on the blockchain to even, we work with the BIA waste management, and they've been doing a lot with some of our clients. You know, not much that I can talk about, but you know, BIA is the largest waste management firm here. So it's interesting to see that there are a lot of like government corporations and large public sectors are coming in and working with blockchain companies, and I'm curious how that's going to pan out with the UAE's goals of being, I think it was by 2025, Dubai wants to be a blockchain-backed government. So I thought that was very interesting. Any thoughts on the landscape here in the UAE?
Not necessarily in Dubai, but I can speak to regulation kind of more broadly. Regulation is important because it makes business easier. And I think when you're looking at adoption frameworks, even from a government perspective, and let alone private sector, you need to have clear rules. Switzerland was really good at doing that all those years ago. And more specifically, when it comes to sustainability, the EU has been pretty forward-thinking in terms of this. Now, for the past few years, you may have heard that blockchain X is green, blockchain Y is green. But did we actually have a regulatory framework to compare between the two? We didn't. And so most of that, for better or for worse, was at best marketing, at worst greenwashing. And that would not be a reputational success for crypto, blockchain, in the way that Billy would describe it. With the MiCA regulation, what we saw were very clear metrics, and for the first time, CASPs in the EU, so exchanges and other large custodians, would have to have sustainability metrics mandated by the regulator and have these on board. What we did at the Cardano Foundation is, instead of relying on these CASPs, we worked with the Crypto Carbon Ratings Institute to refine the methodology and bring about the sustainability metrics 6 months before the regulation kicked in for these particular actors. What that allows us to do now is to know as a network how much energy we consume, how efficient we are, and perhaps chart a roadmap towards actually being more and more energy efficient. And the way that we do that is actually through governance, which is another part of sustainability which we haven't really touched on. Right? That is the power of blockchain, is you can govern, in the case of what was already discussed, energy systems. But beyond that, the actual blockchain layer itself needs to be governed. And Cardano has actually kicked this off quite strongly, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that later. But essentially, regulators are important, and we work with them on a regular basis to educate them, but also to hear their concerns. And we hope that this carries on forward, and probably in the UAE as well.
That's very interesting. When you gave your introduction, you mentioned that you're working with sustainability in 2 ways to kind of find out what kind of projects you can work on and get involved in, and also ensuring that the blockchains you're working with are sustainable. Is Cardano that blockchain?
I hope it will become that blockchain. I don't think any blockchain right now is necessarily sustainable. Some have kind of pushed, you know, their actual economic security into the future, where you could look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other layer ones. All of them need to fulfill a security budget, right? The validators need to receive enough economic incentives to keep the network operational, at the very least. When it comes to governance for Cardano, we'll need to think about these things. Cardano actually has a treasury, for example, right? which should be unlocked pretty soon based on some governance upgrades that are coming up in the next few months and year. And what could be interesting, for example, is besides this group of individuals kind of trying to find more efficient ways of running the network, so these stake pool operators, whatever delta exists between what we can feasibly improve from an energy efficiency perspective, maybe we might want to plug that as an ecosystem, not as a foundation, but as an ecosystem with things like alternative assets that include, tokenized carbon credits, maybe some solar stuff, some energy, et cetera, And I think this is the interesting bit about making the network truly green. It's not about one individual entity making a choice, but it's actually a collective making a choice that is collectively beneficial.
When we're focusing quite a bit on blockchain, but it's not just blockchain that's going to impact for positive, for the better, all industries for sustainable development, but rather it's Web3 as a whole. Because if you think about it today, we're seeing a lot of advancements in the education sector with AI. We're seeing blockchain not just help with supply chain, but also with healthcare, with medical records, giving people identities. We're seeing crypto. We said let's push crypto aside, but cryptocurrencies are actually banking the unbanked. So I mean, it's definitely like 360 holistic viewpoint that Web3 is good for the future. But when we talked about some challenges, we've talked about regulation being one of them. But what are the other barriers to entry? Why isn't this moving as fast as it should be?
So maybe I can take that one as well. For me personally, I mean, I don't want to touch on legislation. I think I want to touch on humans. Because we here in the room, we are the people who are excited, who understand what blockchain is, what's cryptocurrency, what maybe AI, quantum, and so on. But there's a majority of people out there, and many of them are senior management, who actually are not exposed to the technology. And because they don't see the benefit of utilization, whatever components in, I like that you obviously packed it in the Web3, because the Web3 has all of these different trends, right? And because they don't see the reason why they should use it, what is the use case for it, how do they make them more efficient, make more money, more transparent, whatever it is, they don't go into it, or their business models are too safe. So I think, and because if you are in a senior management position and you are excited and you are knowledgeable about these technologies, you will push it within your innovation agenda. And if there are sufficient push from these bigger corporations, they will push on legislation. So I think that this is a very big, ultimately as singular individuals, we might believe in it and we might be very happy and, do our projects in it, but it really goes onto the senior management of companies, which needs to be trained, needs to be convinced, needs to understand what is the benefit, so that they can then go to legislation and say, you know what, we want to bring it into our business strategy, and you are not regulate. So I think it's a little bit of push and pull, but it starts with us. The technology is there, right? It's just there to use and create use cases, but I think in order to do that, it needs to be more spoken about, people need to be more educated and really get excited what it can do. And we need to stop talking about the technology, but we need to start to talk about what the use cases are and what does it mean for me as a company. How does it make me better, faster, make more money, more efficient, whatever it is, right?
If I may just build on that, because what you're doing for the private sector, right, and I'm experiencing also with the government partners, I've been to, 15 countries in the last 12 months working with different governments, and what I experience is, especially in the least developed countries, is there's often not only a lack of knowledge, even a lack of terminology, not even knowing what blockchain is, right? Like so a very basic foundational knowledge is missing. So if you don't have that, how would you adopt any solution? So on the one hand, you have the government, of course, as a regulator, creating a regulatory environment in which companies can thrive, but then you have them also as a user, right? Like, so how do you convince governments to actually introduce blockchain as a technology to simplify or to improve certain processes, right? Be it land management, for example, a registry, right? You spoke about digital identity earlier, to enter all kinds of government services. And what I'm experiencing is that this is exactly the major barrier. It's just lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, and then with that comes, of course, how do you identify the problem space that you're trying to work on, and then say blockchain is actually the right solution to match. And I think that's completely.
And I remember last year when we met, you spoke about your dad on the stage. Intro, and it led into discussion about health data, right? And if you go to the doctor today, anywhere, they start from zero, right? They weigh you, they take your blood pressure, they ask you about your age, about your allergies, so you don't have a record, which is good if you are conscious and you can tell them, but what happens if you're not? How do they know? And I think healthcare is a super example, which is super beneficial for government to obviously tokenize and bring on blockchain as an identity so that you know where you're from, what your allergies, what medication you take, what surgeries did you have, who are your doctors, and all the medical history, which can be obviously anonymized, right? But I think that that's ultimately, because you might get a medication which doesn't work for you, right? I might get something which I need, but maybe my insurance cannot afford it. So there's multiple different implications. And I still remember the story, how you opened the panel talking about your dad and the healthcare.
I talked about basically my dad grew up in the slums of India. And the hospital that he was born in didn't exist anymore. So my dad didn't have access to a birth certificate. And my dad made it later on in life. He's like worked hard, rags to riches kind of story, and couldn't get a permanent residency in Singapore because he didn't have a birth certificate. So I thought that was really backwards. And in fact, that's what got me involved in understanding more about blockchain and learning about the space. Of course, I had my vested interest in cryptocurrencies, but I think it was like that's when I was like, all I've read about are the hacks and scams, but there's so much more to this. And I think that boils down to, Andrea, what you were saying, it's education, right? Ultimately, you're responsible for educating yourself, and you need to learn about the space. And I think it's a conference, the panels like this that help spread the word. And I think you also talked about, in a sense, lobbying, right? It's like kind of explaining to the governments. And I think companies like Coinbase have done a great job at lobbying to the government. They're constantly fighting. What are some other challenges, or kind of that?
I have a couple.
Yeah.
It might be a hot take, but. One thing that I've noticed, and to take Andrea's point about corporates, right? I think some startups in very interesting emerging industries can often be B2B in a way to scale, right? So they offer their services to corporates, and then these corporates realize the value of the actual underlying technology, may invest, may purchase, or may develop their own technology. I think the startup model for Web3 companies has perhaps skewed the go-to-market of many, many, many startups. Why do I say this? We've seen a trend since the ICO summer, winter, and everything that followed, where as a Web3 startup, you start with some form of token launch. And then you try to figure out how you get to product market fit. Why this skews incentives is that founders are left with amounts of money that they typically get when they exit and tend to pay themselves salaries and go to conferences and do all these kinds of things and do not find product market fit. Plus, they have the additional challenge of financially engineering utility and operationally engineering utility of that token within their own platform, usually retroactively. I think one of the ways to solve this challenge is that Web3 startups really put the blockchain stuff in the background, use the technology for what it's useful for. If they need a token, develop it, but really start as a normal business, a normal startup, do the typical grind of not paying yourself a salary or the teams for a while, find that product market fit, and then exit, because that's what usual founders do. And I think there has been a bit of the skewing of the market and incentives for a lot of these Web3 companies that are around for 5 years, and yet to find product market fit, but still alive. And usually by 5 years, if you're a startup, you survive or you die. And here we have a lot of zombies just generally in the industry. I don't know, Billy, do you have an opinion about that?
I think that's a very good point that you made. In fact, just earlier I was reading about IBM's initiative. They actually have a program for supply chain tracking of foods. I think it's called Food for Good, something like that. So they track where the food is coming from farm to table. It's super empowering for the farmers and for the end users to know where the food came from and that it's genuine. And they already have partnerships with like Walmart and Dole and these big, I guess, food companies. But I mean, there's so many companies in web, so many startups. Do you feel like this is just a big boys club? Like ultimately, the ones that like we talked about needing the governments involved in regulation, but it's like the large corporations have easier access to that. So.
I think, if I may, I think the issue is if the case study you just provided, big company does big token launch. You know, if you did that now in most jurisdictions in the West, that would be illegal if you didn't have a license. And so, you know, because you can't just kind of flog securities or tokens without KYC. And so some of these zombies exist because they're really stuck. And so you know, it comes back to this requirement for a symbiotic relationship between regulation and innovation. I think, you know, compliance, and that's the main challenge we've faced, is uptake by the B2B corporate community. And so compliance is just doing things properly. And as brilliant as an innovative Web3 solution may be, if it fails, it's no good. Like, you might as well use a centralized system. Like, that's what the regulators think. And that's what the governments generally think. It's like, why bother, okay, if it's going to fail once on a very important, you know, legal process. So, you know, the onus is really on us, the innovators, to demonstrate to the government and the, you know, the international community that we can create these secure systems that are compliant and that don't fail. And I just think the other issue in uptake that we've faced with blockchain solutions is because initially the challenges technologically were around volume, especially with proof of stake to proof of work. All of the focus, innovation focus, was on driving up volume, transactional volume. Now, what that's resulted in is an absence of persistent assets being demonstrated successfully on-chain in a way that isn't hackable very easily. And so I think that we need to see more long-term, ultra-high-value persistent assets on-chain, you know, talking trillions of dollars, that will persuade the governments and the big banks that, okay, it is possible. Yeah. And then I think we'll see more uptake.
Yeah, if I may just add something to that, because this is something that I've seen over the last couple of years. Blockchain is a solution for many use cases, right? But if you're coming with a solution and you're starting to look for a problem, that might not resonate with the users, right? So problems are experienced. So what I've seen a lot is some blockchain solutions coming up, be that for elections, for land registries, for whatever it is. But what is the project manager sitting in the ministry? What are they experiencing in terms of their problems? Like, how do you make their lives easier, right? So how does that actually impact their lives? Or you can argue with a larger impact on a fraction of the society, landowners, in the example that I just used, right? But I think the biggest problem between problem-solution fit is that we're not trying to understand, what I'm seeing is we're not trying to understand the problem and address it directly. We're coming with a ready-made solution somehow.
Well, you're trying to sell Tesla's electric cars in a place with no electric chargers.
That's it.
And it doesn't work.
You know, Alex was talking about this hype, right? Almost like these companies, Web3 became these superstars, right? Like the Kim Kardashians of the Web3 world, right? And I think that it's so true, and that obviously, you know, makes a lot of banks and regulators a little bit afraid to go with space. But there is a really great time and opportunity right now, because obviously we have another Kardashians on the stage, which is AI, right? Everybody's going into AI. And many companies today now starting to employ consultants to do assessment of their entire workforce and workflows to see how much they can automate and how much can they augment, right? And I think it would be really one of the areas where I see an opportunity is, especially in the consulting world, to say when you see what you can augment and automate, the underlying technology you should decide, is it a Web 2? Is it Web 3? Right? Where does it sit? Is it more efficient for the company when you automate or augment to put the AI on chain, or should it be in a cloud? And I think that's where, you know, possibly I feel that the technology will get a, you know, more boost, because there is so much of great deployment with automation augmentation, besides of the obvious cases which we already spoke about, because everybody's going into it. So, you know, when you do the assessment, decide which tech you would use, and where does it add value? Because then that you can really, because it's the underlying, right, Web 2, Web 3, and you can really go in a much smoother way.
So I wanna just follow on what you said and what Danny said is, one, listen to what the actual user needs and what their problems are, and then two, look at what stacks you build into that, but that's just the background, right? And a very practical case of this is the work that we're doing with UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub. We're doing a MVP project to an extent that is looking to support some of the challenges that they face in a program that they're implementing for the Islamic Development Bank. This program is called Tadamon, and it is meant to support civil society organizations across countries that are part of the Organization of Islamic Countries. The main challenges that they faced was that they had a huge influx of these CSOs that were keen to register, access the program's accelerator, capacity building, and a few other services. And then on the other hand, the donor, the Islamic Development Bank, and UNDP as the implementing partner wanted to gather more data and monitor these CSOs at scale. And the pilot that we're looking to develop together was listening to the challenges that the UNDP team faces in their implementation, listen to the donor in terms of what their needs are, in terms of how they can take this program and scale it. And there we look at solutions that include digital identities on Cardano, that include some very simple forms of AI. And we want to see whether this works. But at the end of the day, the reality is we're solving the problems for UNDP and ISDB. At the end of the day, are these also problems that are faced by civil society organizations? From some of the testing, it says yes. But again, the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is actually in the field, right? So really excited about that. And if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We're doing a very specific workshop somewhat on this topic tomorrow.
That sounds incredible. So on to the next topic. So when people think about Web3 and blockchain, the core fundamental that comes to mind is decentralization. However, with kind of government intervention and the need for more regulation, some may argue that this could cause, I guess, challenges to entrepreneurship, to innovation. As I mentioned earlier, it does seem like a big boys club. So what are your thoughts on that? How much regulation is too much regulation? At what point do you feel like this may hamper innovation?
I think we advocate for principles-based regulation. And I think, again, the EU gets a bad spot for over-regulating when you oversimplify it compared to the US. But then again, the regulatory framework gives clarity and tells you what you can do, what you can't do, and hopefully reduces what is considered a gray area progressively. So really, we advocate for more principles-based regulation, and then I guess Billy had a couple of things to say as well.
I was going to say it's much better to have some regulation, or too much, well, maybe not too much, but some regulation than none. Because, you know, in carbon, for example, it's a very gray area internationally. It's very difficult to navigate a path that is confidently compliant.
When we talk about Bitcoin, right, like so we've talked a lot about blockchain, Web3, crypto as a whole. When we're specifically talking about Bitcoin, has it had more of a positive impact or a negative?
So I'm going to give you a funny story. I joined part of this internal work group that brought together some heads of, let's say, global north, different ministries from the global north that typically look at finance. And this was all under Chatham House rules, but one of the experts there kind of shared, an expert in the field shared a very detailed scientific presentation about Bitcoin energy consumption, Ethereum energy consumption, and a few others. The really interesting take was, this person said, Bitcoin, consumes as much as some small country. We've all heard this. But what he said is, let's compare apples to apples. So Bitcoin consumes as much as television sets globally. Do you want to watch TV for your year, or do you want to have self-sovereign money? Again, that's kind of what he left as the question, the dilemma. Immediately after that, the chair of that meeting, who heads up a central bank in a global north country, went back to saying, so, now that we know that Bitcoin consumes as much as a small nation, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And so I think that narrative, in terms of energy consumption, has been a little bit overbearing and kind of actually moved very little in terms of serious conversations when you look at the value proposition of Bitcoin versus other forms of cryptocurrencies and blockchains that may not even have a crypto.
I think there is an interesting point to the energy consumption on Bitcoin, because I think it has such a negative aftertaste, right? But ultimately, if you look at it, many Bitcoin mining companies and farms are now put into more rural areas, right? Because there's such an overproduction as well of electricity. So if you have a Bitcoin mine, obviously it doesn't consume the same amount of energy the entire time, right? The moment there is an overproduction, that energy can be used to power factories or households and so on. So I think that there is a now really interesting model, which I think to say Bitcoin is green, it's just really far-fetched, but it's going on to the way that if you have that mine in the area, there is an overproduction. How do you utilize the overproduction of the energy into powering, let's say, a small town, right? I think that's, and then when you have the production, how do you ensure that the energy which is consumed by the Bitcoin mine, and then obviously you need to produce that over, is it hydrogen, is it wind, is it solar, how do you compensate? And I think that there is now a really interesting case study, especially for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is focusing big time on bringing that myth about that they are so obviously so evil in terms of carbon footprint down, because there are many upsides of the Bitcoin mining factories in the US. I think it's really the furthest on anybody in the world.
And I think even maybe, hello? Okay. I think even beyond energy consumption, Bitcoin has, I mean, banked the unbanked. You're saying in El Salvador, where every citizen got a little bit of Bitcoin. I mean, is that going to be generational wealth? No, but I think it's a stepping stone to more freedom.
Yeah, but what you're seeing right now in the world is like two camps, right? You see El Salvador with full adoption as legal tender, and then you see, I think it was last week, no, or was it yesterday even, like the ECB, the European Central Bank, talking about Bitcoin and the problems that it comes with. So what you're seeing right now, I think, are two camps globally, like broadly speaking. One for full adoption, the other one very cautious and almost thinking about like how can we not use that, right? So it's I think the question you're asking is not answered, right? Has it been only good or bad, at least for those different camps? We might have our personal opinions, but that's what we're seeing globally, I think.
I don't think it's been good enough yet to say it's been good.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, like maybe it's like still quite balanced. I mean, there's a obvious energy consumption issue with Bitcoin. Maybe it hasn't done enough to bank the unbanked. What are your thoughts on that?
I just think the what you've described in Europe, they're going to be cautious. They're going to do things slowly, and they're probably never going to adopt Bitcoin just because of its association with dangerous financing per se. But they might adopt their own blockchain-based,
decentralized banking system.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think decentralization for global currencies is a tricky one, but I think that Bitcoin per se probably won't drive sustainability, but blockchain
as a whole, yeah.
I think one of the biggest testing 1, 2.
Yeah, you're good.
Can you hear me right? There we go. One of the biggest use cases that is also most mature happens to be stable coins. So, from the perspective of people having access to a different form of currency or a different store of value, some say, would advocate for Bitcoin. Others would typically have, a more stable value based on dollar, right? And cash disbursements are actually a massive use case looked at by UN organizations and others. And what I find interesting as a particular trend is the re-dollarization of many regions through stablecoins, USDT, USDC, and a whole host of others. And I think that's quite an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing because people want to store a value that may not be easily seized. You're seeing this kind of re-dollarization, regardless of whether it is, you know, on one chain or another.
Okay, cool. So I have time for one more question. I'm going to double down 2 questions into one. So what are you doing within your companies to implement blockchain for good, or Web3, we can broaden it? And what sectors do you see benefiting most from blockchain?
So as part of the Cardano Foundation, my role is really to kind of advocate internally and push that agenda forward. This is why one of our core focus areas for enterprise adoption happens to be sustainability. And thanks to the leadership at this Cardano Foundation, this is a reality. So as an organization, that is our focus area, or one of 3. And alternatively to this, I think unlocking funding for UN organizations, NGOs, and others who typically rely on donors, unlocking this funding for innovation and testing new solutions is something that's really important for us. And this is why we work closely with some UNDP colleagues and other UN organizations and Project Catalyst, which is Cardano's decentralized innovation fund, to potentially realize some of these projects and see what gets traction and then find new ways of financing those.
Yeah, and I can just, that's a great segue actually, because that funding that you were talking about, this is something that I'm trying to achieve right now, to get enough funding to go from government to sit with their mid-management level, the people who are implementing the solutions, and sit with them and roll out blockchain trainings, mostly digital trainings, product management, AI, but blockchain is a big part now too, to actually talk to people and start identifying problems and then start ideating different solutions for those problems so it becomes real for them, right? So for me, the main part right now is this awareness raising and this training part to going, you know, be in Liberia, be in Afghanistan, be in the least developed countries and talk to the governments there and see how blockchain can help them solve that. And for that, yeah, raising money to actually be able to, for my team to kind of go out there and do that kind of work, and then continuously be also, there's a bit more of hand-holding than there needed too. So that's what I'm doing.
That's incredible. That's not an easy job.
No.
Yeah, ChangeBlock, we really, in fact, the World Bank and the EU said, you know, years ago that blockchain, IoT can help tackle some of the biggest problems in carbon. And the academic community have been saying so for a long time. And so at ChangeBlock, we're really trying to deliver Web 2.5 first to, you know, enable that vision to become a reality.
I mean, one of the solutions which I'm building right now uses blockchain in 2 areas, right? The one is for provenance and traceability, because it's focused on circular economy in the toys, kids' toys area. And obviously also as a loyalty tokens for the customers. So that obviously one is to use it to show where is it come from, is it second life, third life, fourth life, and who had it and how it was augmented. And the third is if you're going into that ecosystem, you can get tokens to get rewarded so that you can then put into your wallet and obviously convert it into fiat and do whatever you want with it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Just on time, and hope everyone enjoyed the panel. Please, let's give a round of applause to our amazing panelists.
Thank you.